Hello children, hope you are all safe and healthy and keeping well. In the previous class, I had sent you the copy of the story Hearts and Hands by O. Henry. It's a short story and it is wonderfully written by O. Henry. I hope you have enjoyed, especially because there is a sudden twist of tale at the end, an unexpected turn of events that you could never really predict from the beginning. O. Henry was an American writer, and most of his stories have this characteristic ending. There is a surprise ending at the end of his stories. And so it is as far as Hearts and Hands is concerned. The title of the story is also very interesting, and we will come back to the title of the story after we finish the chapter. I am going to explain certain parts and summarize the story for you so that you have a better understanding of the story and an appreciation for the story. The story begins with Denver. The story begins with Denver, where the B&M Express is waiting, and there is an influx of passengers, that is number of passengers entering and leaving the train at that particular station. And in one coach we are introduced to one of the characters of the story, a young woman who is very elegantly dressed, and she is beautiful and confident. Now, among the people who boarded the train, there were two young men, and they were of contrasting appearance, because one of the two men who had a very handsome appearance, and he was bold, and he had a good-looking face and a pleasant appearance. Now, the other person was looking a little rough. He was ruffled, he was gloomy, and he was heavily built, he was strong, and he was not very well dressed either. So the pair of passengers were quite different from each other, and the special factor is that they were handcuffed together. Now, when they entered the train, the only vacant seat which could seat two people was opposite the beautiful young lady who was described in the previous paragraph. So they sat there, and the lady looked, and then she looked away. But suddenly she realized that she had seen someone familiar. So she turns again, and then there is a tender pink tinging her round cheeks. That is, she blushed a little, and she spoke in a sweet voice and said, "Well, Mr. Easton, if you will make me speak first, I suppose I must. Don't you ever recognize old friends when you meet them in the West?" So the young, handsome-looking person is Mr. Easton, and the lady knows Mr. Easton from before, and it's been some time since the two haven't met each other. And so now the lady says, "Don't you recognize me? We are old friends. Yes, we have not met for a number of months or years maybe, but can't you recognize me?" And then the younger man looked at her, and then he seemed to struggle. Then he was a little embarrassed because there was the handcuff that was there. Then finally he recognized and said, "It's Miss Fairchild. I'll ask you to excuse the other hand. It's otherwise engaged at present." Now, Miss Fairchild had given her right hand to be shaken and to be welcomed, greeted rather. But Mr. Easton could not use his right hand because his right hand was handcuffed. So he takes out his left hand and tells the lady to excuse him for using the left hand because his right hand had the handcuff. Now he slightly raised the right hand and showed that it was bound at the wrist by the shining bracelet. The shining bracelet is basically the handcuff. So his right hand is bound to the left hand. It's linked to the left hand of the other person. So initially the girl was very happy to see Mr. Easton, but slowly that look faded and she was horrified, okay, to see that he is handcuffed like a criminal. Now, Easton, with a little laugh, as if amused, was about to speak again when the other forestalled him. Now you can see Mr. Easton, he is a little impulsive. He doesn't think or understand people's feelings before speaking. So he is going to say something maybe boastful, but then the other person, the glum-faced person, stopped him. And the glum-faced person said, "You will excuse me for speaking, miss, but I see you're acquainted with the marshal here." So the man who was sitting beside Mr. Easton was looking at the lady and her expressions when she was speaking with Mr. Easton. So he didn't allow Mr. Easton to say anything. Rather, he said, "Well, I see that you are acquainted with the marshal here." Okay, a marshal is a police constable, police officer, and if you will ask him to speak a word for me when we get to the pen is prison, he will do it, and it will make things easier for me there. He is taking me to Leavenworth prison. It is 7 years for counterfeiting. Alright, which people are handcuffed? The people who are criminals, they are handcuffed. So this man says, Mr. Easton is the marshal and he is taking me to Leavenworth prison where he has been convicted for 7 years for counterfeiting. That is for cheating, for forging, for cheating others. And finally the girl was relaxed. She was relaxed to know that Mr. Easton is not the criminal, but he is actually the police constable who is taking the criminal to jail. So that is what you are doing out here, a marshal. So this is what you are doing in this particular place. You are a marshal now. "My dear Miss Fairchild," said Easton calmly, "I had to do something. Money has a way of taking wings unto itself, and it takes money to keep step with our crowd in Washington. Denver is in the western side of the country, Washington is in the eastern side of the country." So earlier when they had met, they were in Washington. And then he says that, "I took the job of a marshal because we have to do something. One has to earn money because no matter how rich you may be, money has a way of taking wings unto itself, means that money is spent and it can be spent very quickly. It takes money to maintain oneself in Washington, in a posh locality. So therefore, he decided to shift to the west and take up a job." That is what he says, that "I saw this opening in the west, opening for a job in the west, and a marshalship isn't quite as high a position as that of an ambassador. Ambassador will be an officer post. Okay, so that is not very high a post, but then marshalship is something better than nothing." And then the girl remembered the ambassador also from Washington, and she said, "The ambassador doesn't call anymore." So these people were actually quite close to each other, the ambassador, Mr. Easton, Miss Fairchild, and then all of a sudden these people vanished. The ambassador, Mr. Easton, they just simply disappeared. And so the girl, when she met Mr. Easton, she was feeling very happy. So she recalls those times when they were acquainted with each other, and she says the ambassador doesn't call anymore. And so now you are one of those dashing western heroes, and you ride and shoot and go into all kinds of dangers. This is a romanticized view of policemen who are thought as heroes, who will go about like a hero, shooting people, saving other people, and she is very happy to see that image of Mr. Easton. And then she says, "Yeah, that is a little different from the Washington life. You have been missed from the old crowds, the old acquaintances, the friends that he had made earlier when he was in Washington, they are all missing him. Now the girl's eyes, fascinated, went back to rest upon the glittering handcuffs. And then the other man said, "Don't you worry about them, miss." So she can't understand, if Mr. Easton is the marshal, then why is he wearing a handcuff? So the other man explains it and says to him, all marshals handcuff themselves to their prisoners to keep them from getting away. And Mr. Easton knows his business. Now when you are taking a criminal from one place to another, you have to be very, very safe. So they handcuff themselves to the criminal so that the criminal would not run away. It's a normal thing. So the girl asked, "Will we see you again in Washington? So will you be returning to Washington in some time?" But Mr. Easton says, no, not soon, I think. My butterfly days are over, I fear. Butterfly days is happy, carefree days. They are over after all. And then the girl, irrelevantly, not really relevant to the conversation, because she was asking whether you would be coming to Washington. He said no. But irrelevantly, they were not talking about the West. Suddenly, she starts talking about the West. She says, "I love the West." Her eyes were shining softly. She looked away out the car window. She began to speak truly and simply, without the gloss of style and manner. So she was speaking very, very frankly from her heart at the moment. She said, "Mama and I spent the summer in Denver. She went home a week ago because father was slightly ill. I could live and be happy in the West. I think the air here agrees with me. Money isn't everything, but people always misunderstand things and remain stupid." Now she is giving veiled hints that she is attracted to Mr. Easton. She knows that Mr. Easton has now almost settled in the West. He is a marshal, so he may not be earning very highly like business people or like they were doing when he was in Washington. He must have shown that he was very, very rich at that time. However, now of course she knows that he doesn't earn so much. So in a way, she's trying to tell him that she could be with him in the West. She has feelings for him. She is trying to express that. And that is why she says money isn't everything. But people always misunderstand things. People think that money is what makes people attractive towards them. But money is not everything. That is what she's trying to tell. And the person who was the criminal who was saying that Mr. Weston is the marshal, he notices this and he realizes that if he doesn't stop her, she might express everything clearly. But he stops her and he says, "Say, Mr. Marshall." Okay, he cuts the conversation in between and turns to Mr. Easton and says, "Say, Mr. Marshall, this isn't quite fair. I am needing a drink and haven't had a smoke all day. Haven't you talked long enough? Take me in the smoker now, won't you? I'm half dead for a pipe, so why don't you take me to the smoking area? I need to smoke and I haven't had a drink." So the bound travelers, that is the travelers who were bound or linked with the handcuff, they stood up. And Easton, with the same slow smile on his face, said to Miss Fairchild, "I can't deny a petition for tobacco. I cannot deny him the request for a smoke. It is the one friend of the unfortunate. Okay, he's already in an unfortunate situation. He's going to prison. He's feeling bad. So let him have a bit of a smoke. Goodbye, Miss Fairchild. Duty calls, so I have to continue performing the duty of a marshal, And she said, "It's too bad you are not going east. But you must go on to Leavenworth, I suppose." Now she, as it is mentioned, reclothing herself with manner and style, she gets back to her composed position when she realizes that Mr. Easton has not been able to understand the hints, and probably he doesn't have the kind of feelings that Miss Fairchild has for him. So she says, okay, you must go on to Leavenworth, I suppose. Yes, said Mr. Easton, I must go to Leavenworth. And the two men, they walked down the aisle into the smoker. Now, that is the end of the incident. But the incident is being revealed by two other passengers who were sitting nearby, and they heard the whole conversation. So the two passengers in a seat nearby had heard most of the conversation. So one of the passengers said to the other one that Marshall's a good sort of chap. Some of these Western fellows are all right. So the people from the East, they thought that the people from the West aren't so good. But this Marshall, he seemed like a good person. He has a good heart. Pretty young to hold an office like that, isn't he? Don't you think he was very young, Mr. Easton? Young, exclaimed the first speaker. Why, oh, didn't you catch on? Say, did you ever know an officer to handcuff a prisoner to his right hand? Okay, so he said that do you think that a policeman would handcuff his right hand with the left hand of the criminal? Never, because the right hand is the dominant hand, and the policeman would like to keep that hand free just in case there is some problem or the criminal tries to run away or act funny or do something drastic. The right hand needs to be there free so that he can control the situation. Now, Mr. Easton's right hand was handcuffed to the other fellows whose name is not mentioned in the story, to the other fellow's left hand. So who is the marshal in the story? Not Mr. Easton. It is the other rough-looking fellow who had a very gloomy face. That is actually the marshal, and Mr. Easton is the criminal. He is the one who has been caught for cheating. Probably he cheated a number of people in Washington also, and that is why he might have lived a very happy and carefree life because he had a lot of money somehow. Then he may have gone on to Denver to do something more, and the police had been after him, and finally they caught him. So the criminal is Mr. Easton, and the marshal is the glum-faced man. Now why? Now the question that will come into your mind is, why did the marshal intervene in between the conversation between Fairchild and Mr. Easton? Because the marshal had seen Miss Fairchild's reaction and facial expressions when she was talking to Mr. Easton. And the marshal observed and noticed that Miss Fairchild had some feelings for Mr. Easton. And Mr. Easton might have said everything if he hadn't stopped him. He would have probably said the truth. And that would really, really break the girl's heart, because she would have been horrified to have had feelings for a criminal. Now, the fellow, the marshal, being a good man from heart, did not want a girl's heart to break, especially because this would be probably the last time she would be ever seeing Mr. Easton. As you know, he is going to prison for 7 years. Secondly, then you will say, why didn't he allow Miss Fairchild to speak out everything? Because he also observed and noticed that Mr. Easton is a very casual type of fellow, and he really has no concern or no regard for Miss Fairchild. So he didn't want the girl to reveal her feelings at this point when he was going to prison, and he also knew that for 7 years they would not be meeting each other because he would be in prison for 7 years. So he did not want the girl to express everything. Mr. Easton might have taken it lightly, or she might have been disappointed that for 7 years he would not turn up again. Okay, so that is why the marshal is being called a good type of a fellow because he understood Miss Fairchild's feelings for Mr. Easton, and he did not want her to feel bad in what you would probably call the last meeting between Miss Fairchild and Mr. Easton. Now, very clearly you can decipher the theme of the story, that appearances can be deceptive. So when you saw Mr. Easton as an attractive man, you thought that he must be a good person. But attractive appearances always do not mean that the person may also be good from within. Here the glum-faced, rough-looking man was not as good and smooth in appearance like Mr. Easton, but he has a much better heart probably, and he is the marshal. And in contrast to that, you have Mr. Easton, who is frank, handsome and smooth looking, a very smooth talker you can also say, but he is actually the criminal which Miss Fairchild or anybody else could not have guessed. And we as readers also might not have been able to guess until in the end the reality was revealed by these two passengers. Alright, also there are a few hints that you can see which shows especially when Mr. Easton says that my butterfly days are over, it means that my happy days and my carefree days, they're all over. That would be a hint that he is the one going to prison and he is not really the marshal. But you can think of it as a hint only after you have read the ending, not before that. And then we come back to the title, Hearts and Hands. Hearts is for feelings. Okay, so Miss Fairchild had feelings for Mr. Easton, and when the other person said that Mr. Easton is the marshal, she didn't look at the hands, okay, hearts and hands. She overlooked the fact. Heart is the seat of passion, and she did not think what could be the reality. And the hands showed the reality which only the other passengers who were not involved with this fellow could see, because they were at a distance and they could observe that the right hand of Mr. Easton was handcuffed to the left hand of the marshal. So obviously Mr. Easton is the criminal and not the marshal, because the marshal will always use the left hand to be handcuffed to the criminal, so that the right hand, which is the dominant hand, is free. In case there is any need to intervene, he will use his right hand. However, she was so involved in her feelings with Mr. Easton that she did not notice this fact. She overlooked this fact because she just had romantic feelings for the man, Mr. Easton. So with the heart she felt, and she felt, so she refused to look at the hands. But the hands gave away the reality, and only the passengers whose heart was not involved with that person could decipher the reality. So very interesting choice of title, very attractive choice of title. As you can see, hearts that deal with the feelings and hands that deal with the fact that they are handcuffed together, and the fact that Mr. Easton is therefore the criminal. I hope that you have understood the story very well. You have understood the surprise ending, the themes, and really enjoyed the story. If there is any doubts, you can contact me. I will be posting the time when you can contact me for clearing your doubts. Reread the chapter and go through the explanation a couple of times, and I'm sure it will benefit you in having a clear understanding and appreciation of the story. Thank you.